I got to tell you guys that making a podcast has been a dream come true for me, and it would not be possible without Anchor. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it is the easiest way to make a podcast. So let me explain a little bit about it. It's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. You can even make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership whatsoever. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. So download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started today. Thank you guys. It may be a mad world out there, but don't worry. We all go a little mad sometimes. That's right, I went there. Welcome to A World of Books with your host, author Anthony Avina. Hello there, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of A World of Books with your host, author Anthony Avina. How's everyone doing this week? We're actually going to do something special for this week because now, as I'm recording, this is the week of Halloween, and this episode will be going up 2 days before Halloween. And I thought, a book podcast should have a special episode that goes up on Halloween Day. So today's episode is actually going to be a special reading of a short story that I was sent by an author, and I'll get into that in a minute. The second episode of the week, which will air on Halloween Day, is going to be all about horror and Halloween spooky vibes. So we're going to talk about some books that I'm going to share my reviews on that are in the horror genre. I'm going to talk about some of the best, not only books, but films and shows and comics, all that fun stuff that you guys can enjoy on Halloween Day. And then I'm going to get into some of my favorite themes and characters within the horror genre. So look for that on Sunday, October 31st. And we will have a special Halloween extravaganza here on A World of Books. For today's episode, though, I'm not sure how long this is going to end up being because the story I have to read is a little over 12,000 words. So we'll see how fast I can read the story itself. But I was very honored to be contacted by author Z.M. Delgado. And the story that they have shared with us is Liberty and Death. It is the story of a girl who witnesses death reap her family in the aftermath of a natural disaster. In her grief, she wishes to be taken with her family as well. However, this is not permitted, as Death explains it is not her time. In defiance of Death's wishes, the girl attempts to end her life on her own terms, which sets off a bloody series of events and raises questions as to the very nature of free will and its role in destiny. Now, as the synopsis points out, this does have elements and themes of suicide, but I do want to add a little anecdote to that, or a little side note, I should say, that those themes, those story points, kind of come across more in the terms of Bill Murray's Groundhog Day, but without the humor. It's more or less about what happens when a person feels like their free will has been taken from them, and the defiance that we all feel in the face of having something of ours oppressed. So the initial mention of this is obviously out of grief, but as you read the story, or as I read the story to you, I think you'll learn that that theme becomes less and less about the actual act and more about the effect that the character is trying to have on death itself. So it does come from the point of view of death, so that is a unique perspective, and does have, as the author describes, a vaguely folklore legend sort of feel to it. So I'm going to be reading the story to you and then sharing my thoughts on it. So here we go. Now everyone, here is a brand new segment here on the podcast that I am temporarily calling The Author's Corner Spooky Edition. Alright guys, now I'm going to be leaving ZM Delgado's social media pages and contact info down below. You can actually read the story for yourself on his website, so please feel free to do that. And again, I want to say thank you to ZM Delgado, and appreciate you reaching out and asking me to not only read but review your book, or your short story. So here we go. This is Liberty and Death by ZM Delgado. Inspired by the song Dead Girl by Acid Bath. In quotes from the song, "When death sleeps, he dreams of you." In the manner of mortals, it could have been said that death was asleep. If sleeping was in fact a thing death did, which it did not really. For death was ever wakeful, ever aware. Death was unceasing and constant. So no, death did not sleep. Its mission was too essential, its scope too grand, to afford it the luxury of the human notion of unconsciousness. Death did not have time for sleep, of course. Death did not have time for anything. Time, as it was a human construct, a thing of their creation to measure the incremental moments of their lives, to somehow quantify their existences into the tiny little packages they called years. These years chronicled what mortals were, from the instant they sparked into existence, to the next when they took death's hand and walked forth from this plane. To them, that time took years and ran in a line in only one direction. But to death, it all happened now. Everything, everywhere, everyone, all that was, is, and will ever be occurred in one singular moment. So as all things occurred at once, and death was present at the end of all things, it was simultaneously both everywhere and at once, and nowhere at all. Waking and sleeping, focusing on each individual life form, while not thinking of any one of them in particular. Taking no interest in these temporary lives, yet playing an integral part in each and every one. Death was infinite, limitless, and eternal. More than all that, though, death was inevitable, and death was expected. For each spark of life doled out by the design was set to burn for only so long, and upon cooling, was compelled to return to the source to be reignited. The sparks are allowed to burn, to grow, to glow, but in the end all flames must cool, each in their own time. So it was for all the ages, from the beginning, long before the counting of years, even until the end, long after all counting ceased. That is, except for one peculiar day in particular, which happened to take death's notice. Something about it seemed different somehow, and death did not know why. Pushing the forwardmost part of its inconceivable cognition, it sought out the anomalous instant and was there. This day was found in the years counted pertaining to the life of a girl called Liberty, who lived in a village by the sea. It all began for her on a dark and stormy night. A great tempest rose from the ocean and brought down its fury upon her and her people. Lightning lit the black sky, and thunder shook the town. Rain poured down, turning the streets to flowing rivers. The winds whipped, tearing at the homes, first rattling, then wrenching roofs from their families and casting them into the air or cascading them down upon the terrified families below. The waves rose up and swept across what remained, dragging much of what was into the ocean depths, never to be seen again. At dawn, the clouds parted, and the sun shone much as it always did. The wind blew lightly, and smelled of fresh rain. The waves lapped in soothing rhythm against the sand, almost softening the screams of fear and anguish that rose from inland. Death was already there, of course, all over the village, in fact. In the collapsed homes and piles of rubble, in the overturned vehicles, and in the bottom of the harbor, in the hospital, passing over those whose times had not yet come, awaiting those who had. The tranquility of the calm beach was in staggering contrast to the scene of utter chaos and despair that unfolded along Main Street. As death strolled casually through the fray, it watched over each of the lives it was sent to collect. Cointaneous attention and came applied to each, synchronically observing, explaining, and ushering each spark across the threshold of worlds. Never slowing, never rushing, never early and never late. Always there, instantaneous and expected. Death was much like the storm itself. The humans had not known when the world came, but death had. The storm had been slated to strike this town since before all reckoning. Just as each and every life that had been extinguished had been meant to be here in this place at this prescribed moment to ensure its extinguishing. It was all according to the design. That was the great and cruel irony of the human condition. They, who were most affected by the design, were somehow mercilessly unaware of it. All the other creatures, all the other sparks, from the lowest bacterium to the celestial beings beyond mortal understanding, like death itself, were aware of and at peace with the design. Somehow, the humans had forgotten it, or perhaps refused to accept it and cast it off. Death was not sure. Even the celestial beings, who knew much, could not answer all questions, and they could not interfere. The design had to be maintained, so humans and others like them, who existed in the uncomfortable place beyond mere survival, yet short of true enlightenment, suffered extensively as they tried to come to grips with their own awareness. They stumbled through and fought against their natures in failed attempts to control that which cannot be controlled, and refusing to govern that which can be governed. So one at a time, and all at once, death shepherded the dead away from the chaos and pain of their mortal husks and onward. Working its normal fashion of unwavering persistence, it drifted through and relished not that was not right. Death did not take pleasure in its work, though it did not disdain in it either, as the mortals so often did as they went about their labors. The notion was closer to satisfaction, though that implied some sort of need being fulfilled, and death did not have needs to satisfy. However, there was a certain peace in a job well done, placidity in the understanding that the design continued and that the role of death in it was sustained. So death was placid in that peace, as it worked, and all was as it should have been. However, that placidity was broken when from among the corpses and wreckage, from among the wailing mourners and suffering injured, death heard a small voice that seemed directed right at it. "Have you come to take me as well?" asked the young girl. She knelt over the body of a woman and was surrounded by many others. Death then experienced a new sensation for the first time. Confusion. For in all its timeless eons of consciousness, never had a living mortal looked upon its form, let alone spoken directly to it. Death stood silent and even gazed about with its awareness, certain the child must be addressing some unnoticed mortal. However, there was no one else nearby, and though Death knew it could not be so, this girl certainly seemed to be staring directly at it. "If you have come to take me, I am ready," the girl said, as she stood up and did her best to smooth her tattered dress. Death studied the girl for what she would have considered to be a long time, trying to understand. At first it thought perhaps this was one of the other Celestials playing some sort of duplicity, but ruses like that could upset the design, and had not been permitted since the chaos first began to arrange. Death looked her up and down, and in spite of its best attempt to discover otherwise, this being appeared to be nothing more than a human girl who was alive and could see it. "Who are you?" Death inquired in puzzlement. It was a question it had never had to ask before. There was an odd vibration in the fabric of reality as the words came forth. so subtle that it was barely tangible, yet inexplicably present. It resonated outward throughout its own myriad consciousness, and for one immeasurably brief moment brought nearly the entirety of its focus down onto that point. As quickly as it had occurred, it passed. A fleeting instance in an incomprehensible timeline that ran in all directions and back in upon itself, yet was far too long to be ignored. Death did not understand. All the mortals it had ever had dealings with had been known to it in accordance with the design. Every single one. This girl, whoever she was not among them. My name is Liberty. I've been waiting for you all night. You've been waiting for me? Death repeated, finding this an unusual thing to say, even by human standards. Yes, all night. Why would you be waiting for me? For my turn to die. Tell me, when you kill me, will it hurt? She asked, her voice timid in the question. I'm not here to kill you, Death replied honestly. You have killed everyone else. My mother and my father in the plague last year, my brothers in the war. Now that you have sent this storm and taken my grandmother, my aunts, uncles, and cousins, all my neighbors, I am the last one left. Surely it is my turn now. Death knew all of them. Death had taken them, each as their spark expired, each by design. However, Death still did not know this girl or understand how this conversation was happening. You are not the last. There are some of your people who remain. But my family is gone. I want to be with them. Won't you take me with you? I do not know you, Liberty, and I'm not here to take you. Death turned from her and tried to move away from the unsettling encounter. However, the girl called after it. Libby, she shouted defiantly. What is this now? Death asked. Libby. My proper name is Liberty, but most everyone calls me Libby. I bet your list says Libby. Check and see, and you'll see that it's me you're here to reap. To reap? Death repeated. Yes, to reap. Your face is a skull, you wear long black robes, and you carry a scythe. You are the Grim Reaper, aren't you? Death gazed down upon his own visage and found the child was correct. Its corporeal form was as she had described. That was the way for beings of celestial nature. They could not truly be seen by mortals, and so the design was bent and arranged into whatever their minds had been conditioned to perceive. My name? I do not have a name. I simply am. If you do not have a name, then what am I going to call you on our journey? I am Death, that is all. And as I said, I do not know you, and I am not here to take you. Again, turning from her, she protested. That's not true, she called after, now following Death down the road. Parts of its consciousness peeled away to attend to others as their lives expired all around them. However, this piece of it was now distracted and unable to work, as Liberty persisted. We have been introduced. You said you're Death, and I told you my name. So you can't say you do not know me. And like I said, if you just look on your list under Libby, not Liberty, you'll see I'm all set to go. Death stopped again. Liberty. Libby, she interrupted. Libby. Well, I do not understand how exactly. I admit that we have been introduced. However, I can assure you I am not here today for you. Now I really must be going. You've checked the list again? Under Libby this time? She relentlessly questioned. There is no list. This is not how it works. It either is your time or is not, Death answered, his tone more brisk than usual. A second new sensation was upon him now, one of distress, derived from an inability to complete his task, one that challenged his placidity. Death was feeling frustrated with his child. You've taken my family, my friends, and my home. My whole village. You took everything. Why can I not go with them? What life have you left me with to live? She pleaded, as tears began to run down her face. I cannot take you before your time. Until then, your life is your own. You shall live it as you wish. You are still young for your kind. The design has spared you this day. Trust it is for good reason, Death told her, and swept away. Unsure if these words had corrected or exasperated the events that led to this conversation, it decided it was better not to pursue the matter further. Sensing that its work was complete, at least for this when and where, it decided it was time to go. Recoiling the many tendrils of thought that compromised its consciousness, it stepped through the threshold of existence and returned to the timeless place where all things were now. To Libby's eyes, Death simply vanished, gone in a literal blink, leaving her alone amongst the ruins of her broken life. An anomaly has manifested within the design, Death sent into the nothingness before him. What do you mean, anomaly? The other replied. That other, who was in many ways the negative image of Death. Or perhaps it could be better said that Death was the shadow of this other, the pale thing in the darkness that was the reflection of its sunlit counterpart. Visually based explanations of the pair could only fall utterly short of the mark of true explanation, as these two had no physical forms to describe. Mortal eyes could not perceive them, nor could finite minds comprehend the nature of such beings, at least not when they occupied this place. Like Death, life could assume any tangible form, but never did so here. Care to elaborate? An encounter with a mortal has manifested, the likes of which the design has yet to conceive, Death explained. What sort of encounter? Life asked, annoyed by Death's vague explanation, yet still curious. A brief exchange of words, nothing more. So what? You talk to mortals every moment of every day, Life replied, disinterested. You mistake my meaning. I speak to the sparks of mortals, never the mortals themselves. This mortal child, however, could somehow perceive me. Since their kind was first introduced to the design, never had one seen my form, let alone heard my voice or spoke directly to me. Never while they still lived, and yet she did. Was she injured severely? Perhaps in her dying moments? Some of them have seen you then, Life queried. Only those who have already crossed the threshold. Their bodies may linger for a time, but their sparks are already with me. None of them return, and besides, this child was untouched by the events that had brought me attention to it. She was not known to me, Death explained. Show me, Life requested, and let Death oblige. This was easier for the two of them than slow, arduous conversation. Though their compositions could never intermingle, their thoughts could. Death sent the images of his encounter with Liberty, and Life received them instantly. Then events were reviewed and contemplated with equal efficiency, as Life replied only, Interesting. That is all you have to say? Well, that's what it is. You have no further insight to offer? What further insight do you seek? I seek an explanation. I have none. I do not know of this child. She is clearly alive and thus under your domain. How is this possible? It is not, yet it is occurring. Is there nothing you can tell me of her? Nothing that can clarify? You know that I cannot. But why her? What makes her different? Perhaps because this child has seen your work so much in her short lifetime, that somehow she has become familiar with your presence. Beyond that, I do not wager a guess. Then, what are we to do? What we always do. Our jobs. We do what is necessary to ensure the continuation of the design. nothing more, nothing less. Speaking of which, a new star is being born. I'm going to be busy for a while. Trust in the design. Everything will work out. With those words, life was gone. Or at least the part of its mind that was devoted to conversing with death was gone. Death was again alone in the void, with nothing gained from its encounter, but a lingering notion that something, somewhere, was out of alignment. Okay, guys, well, we're already over 20 minutes into this, and we're only about 7 pages into the story. So, I think my best course of action here is to only read a short snippet of this story, because it is so thought-provoking and so insightful that I don't think that I could spend the next hour and a half reading this to you guys. And I think it's something that needs to be experienced. I think stories that are longer like this is something to be experienced. So that's what I think I'm going to do. This is where I'm going to stop reading the story and start getting into the actual review part of it. Now, as you may have guessed from what I just said, I love the story. It was thought-provoking. It was inspired to make death the protagonist without coming up with some twist on the mythos that gave it an identity. To have it just be death and not humanity's idea of death was such an inspired way of going about things. For those of you who read the story on the author's website, which again, all those are going to be linked down below, and I highly recommend you go check them out. I think that you guys are going to absolutely love the direction the story takes. As I did mention at the beginning of the story, it does have some instances of suicide, of ending one's life, but it takes a different turn than most stories that deal with those kind of topics would take. Not that it's any less serious, but I think it gets more into the philosophical side of things, the question of morality, of freedom, of free will versus destiny. Those themes are very, very prevalent in this book, and how the evolution of this faux relationship between Death and Libby is very interesting. Not a romantic relationship, but more of like something that starts out as adversarial and turns into something of respect and brings a new perspective, not just for Death as a character, but for life overall. Not the character of life, actual life. It was just so engaging. I was hooked instantly. The author's way of writing is just so articulate and well written, and draws you in immediately to the narrative. Really well done in that regard. As the story goes on, Libby's actions to get Death's attention get bolder and more chilling. It also sets the character of Death, the role of Death, on a new venture, on a new path that kind of allows readers to look at Death in real life as something different, as not something stationary or final, but as something changing, as something evolving. And maybe not every end is an ending. Maybe some endings are just beginnings to something else. And it also does a great job of actually showing the value of life, the true value of life, not other people's perceptions of what your life should mean for you, but what you can make life mean for yourself. Again, just it's so well written and so passionate, and definitely more philosophical than horror, obviously. I know we're in the spooky month, so anything involving death, you might think, oh, it's going to be scary. It's not terrifying, but it's really just gripping and draws you in, narratively speaking, as well as character growth, and so thematically driven. So, highly recommend you go check out this story for yourself. It's a very great read. It's free to read on the author's website. Again, go check out the links in the bio of this episode and go read the story for yourself. The story is called Liberty and Death. It's about 27 pages in length total, but I think you guys were really, really going to enjoy it. So, yeah, that was really great. And again, thank you to author ZM Delgado. I'm going to leave the link to his Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter down below, as well as his website. And please go give him a follow, like, subscribe, whatever you want to do. Sign up for his newsletter. But yeah, I hope you guys will go enjoy that and check it out for yourself. So thank you so much for everyone who tuned in this week and listened to the podcast. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Like I said, we're going to have a fuller episode on Sunday for Halloween, so stay tuned for that. And I look forward to talking to you guys very, very soon for the new Halloween extravaganza. Everyone, stay safe out there. Do well with your families. Stay healthy. And we'll see you next time on A World of Books with your host, author Anthony Avina. Take care, everyone. You've been listening to A World of Books with your host, author Anthony Avina. Thank you for listening to this week's episode. If you liked it, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts especially, but wherever you can, and share the podcast with anyone you feel would enjoy it. If you have any suggestions for books we should feature on the podcast, or maybe a topic that you'd like to hear me discuss, please feel free to let me know, and make sure you follow me on all my social media pages so you can get the latest info on this amazing new podcast. I hope you guys enjoy and have a great week.